welcome back to Ethereum Audible. I hope you're having a wonderful Tuesday. It's the middle of the week, and we are about to dive into Ethereum in-depth, Ethereum Audible. Welcome back to our second part of our read-through of Flashboys 2.0. Just as a reminder, last week we started reading this paper called Flashboys 2.0, and it's the genesis paper of the high-frequency trading problem on Ethereum. Not only Ethereum, it also exists in other smart contract blockchains, but we're dealing specifically with Ethereum. And as a brief reminder, last week we ran through the premise of the paper that the issue of miner extractable value and priority gas auctions, and basically ways that miners or validators can reorganize transactions in a block, can cause them kind of outsized rewards. And the theory of this paper is that this can cause consensus layer risks for a blockchain like Ethereum. And we ran through a few different topics that we're going to cover. Some we already covered, which include pure revenue opportunities, priority gas auctions, and this read-through we're going to dive into miner extractable value and the risks to the consensus layer. But just as a kind of brief reminder, we dove into what smart contracts are and how gas and fees work in Ethereum, and the evolution of exchanges, order books, continuous limit exchanges, and finally decentralized exchanges, and how that's caused front-running arbitrage by bots that bid against each other in the system to get their transaction first so that they can reap the rewards of ordering the transactions in the proper order. Today, we're going to continue reading through the article. I'm not going to read it all because, just like a lot of academic papers, there's a kind of long section in the middle about the methodology, which I think will be less interesting. I'm going to read the first part of it just because I think it's really cool, and then we're going to dive into the consequences of what this means, and we will skip forward. So we're going to dive in, but before we do that, as always, I want to shout out Alpe Audio. Alpe Audio is an audio education platform. If you like to learn on the go, if you're interested in topics like creative thinking, neuroscience of productivity, everyday mindfulness, building in public, entrepreneurship, solo entrepreneurship, well, Alpe Audio has a course for you with over 30 courses from top instructors and built into a neat little package that you can study anywhere, anytime, from A to Z when you're on the go. Basically, audio courses with summaries, flashcards, highly produced, everything you love in a podcast, and online learning in one place. So that's Alpe Audio, A-L-P-E, Audio. And with that, we are going to dive in. And this is part 4 of Flashboys 2.0, Arbitrage Prevalence Measurement Study. We now present empirical measurements of the prevalence of arbitrage. We discuss our methodology and its limitations. A. Experimental setup. We first describe the experimental harness used to observe PGA transactions, that displayed in Figure 3. On-chain data is not sufficient to analyze PGAs, which are priority gas auctions, as all but the final winner transaction are discarded by the network. Furthermore, because transactions are replaced so quickly and nodes don't propagate replaced transactions, many transactions are never even propagated to all Ethereum nodes. No tools existed for analysis of unconfirmed and rejected transactions, so we wrote our own. We forked the Go Ethereum client to record unconfirmed transactions in the mempool. We deployed 6 geo-distributed nodes across multiple data centers, with timestamps synchronized to the nanosecond level by NTP. We collected an observation every time one of the 256 nodes paired with one of our deployed modified nodes relayed a transaction to us. We collected 9 months of data, amounting to over 300 gigabytes, including 708,385,840 unique observations of priority gas auction arbitrage bots. Node locations are shown in Figure 3, although not all nodes were online throughout the experiments. we ultimately sacrifice timing resolution to reduce prohibitive ongoing costs. And that's where I'm going to cut it off with the methodology. I just think that part is super cool, and it kind of shows the depths to which these researchers went to research this topic. Super cool. So I'm going to jump to the section B and the observations. We now describe key results of our data gathering. Figure 4 shows the size and breadth of the arbitrage market, which I will describe to you. Denominated in ETH, we choose to use ETH denominations in the rest of the work as they display a relatively consistent distribution, as shown in the figure. USD revenues are more volatile. This distribution is consistent with common understanding of arbitrage as sources from market structure design, as ETH is the most liquid traded token on this market. As seen in the graph, after the initial market development in late 2017, a relatively active period of arbitrage occurred during which bots often performed over 1,000 daily trades for a daily revenue of 10 to 100 ETH. Later, the market matured into a more steady and consistent profit distribution, with 1 to 10 ETH available for arbitrage daily. Recently, an increasing number of pure revenue trades is observed, showing the trend of the DEX market to smaller retail transactions and more efficient market designs, decreasing the average opportunity size but presenting more frequent opportunities to a more efficient bot market. So basically what this chart and the summary says is that initially there is a large amount of bot activity. There are less bots, but each one generates more of a reward. Over time, the market trends towards efficiency because more bots propagate and therefore the profit per bot decreases. And this happens with the propagation towards DEXes, which have more retail trades that are smaller. They offer a calculation of what one of these bots could be making each day, and it comes out to pretty nice, which is 8.32 ETH. At the time, this was written in 2019. At the time, that was $2,500. Today, that would be higher, but today, naturally, the market is more efficient. So what's interesting about the Flashbots theory and in practice is at the end of the day, there are market forces that cause competition and bring prices down so that only the strongest and most efficient bots survive. But that is later. I'm going to jump forward now and skip over a whole section on priority gas auction modeling, where they offer different kinds of parameters and models if you want to get into this, as well as strategies. And I'm going to jump straight to section 7, which is on page 14, of miner extractable value and blockchain security. Because I think this is where things get interesting, especially as it pertains to the merge and proof of stake. So section 7, miner extractable value and blockchain security. PGAs and DEX arbitrage may not seem immediately harmful or relevant to the security of an underlying blockchain. They simply might seem an efficient mechanism for conveying market information among network participants. Unfortunately, we now argue DEXes in fact present a serious security risk to the blockchain systems on which they operate, i.e., at the consensus layer. In other words, as key results of our work is that application layer security poses a current and direct threat to consensus layer security. In a stable blockchain, block rewards incentivize honest miner behavior. As we show empirically in this section, though, order optimization fees, or implicit fees a miner is able to reap by leveraging their control of a consensus epoch, can exceed the block reward and instead incentivize forking attacks. To capture order optimization fees, a miner can reorder users' transactions and potentially insert their own, reaping profit in Ether directly to their account. For example, a miner could execute the pure revenue transactions described in this work themselves, while still claiming the PGA fees for all the losing arbitrage bots attempting to do the same. Order optimization fees represent one case of a more general quantifiable value we call miner extractable value, MEV. MEV refers to the total amount of Ether miners can extract from manipulation of transactions within a given time frame. which may include multiple blocks worth of transactions. In systems with high MEV, the profit available for optimizing for MEV extraction can subsidize forking attacks of two different forms. The first is a previously shown undercutting attack that forks a block with significant MEV. The second is a novel attack called a time bandit attack that forks the blockchain retroactively based on past MEV. Undercutting attacks were previously considered a risk primarily in the distant future, when block rewards and Bitcoin are expected to diminish below transaction fees. By measuring the significance and magnitude of order optimization fees, our work shows that undercutting attacks are a present threat. Time bandit attacks are also a present and even larger threat. They can leverage not just order optimization fees, but any forms of miner extractable value obtained by rewinding a blockchain. Time bandit attacks' existence implies that DEXes and many other contracts are inherent threats to the stability of proof-of-work blockchains, and the larger they grow, the bigger the threat. So I'll just stop to encapsulate the idea here, and the idea is that if there is enough of a reward in the recent past for a miner to gain by reordering transactions, the assumption is that they will do this. And without MEV, this wouldn't be possible because the rewards that they would be getting would simply be the rewards for mining a valid block. And that's a set reward. It's an equal reward. There's no variability. But with MEV, the rewards for mining specific blocks can spike dramatically to make it worthwhile for miners to conduct these attacks. So continuing with our read, Section A, Order Optimization Fees, Measurement Study. We now lower bound the severity of order optimization fees in DEXes. Figure 15 shows the distribution of pure revenue order optimization fees as a fraction of total miner extractable value in Ethereum. We conservatively estimate MEV in this context as the sum of explicit transaction fees and pure revenue order optimization fees, making our distribution an underestimate of the share of MEV that does not come from explicit fee payments in Ethereum. Note that PGAs themselves are an indirect mechanism for miners to claim order optimization fees. If miners instead claimed order optimization fees directly, there would be no incentive to bid or create a PGA. Of all blocks since blocks 3,875,490, the first block we observed with a pure revenue order optimization fee from decentralized exchange arbitrage, approximately 3.6% contain at least one pure revenue arbitrage transaction. Of these blocks, roughly 18,000 blocks contain pure revenue order optimization profits that are less than 1% of the total stealable fees, confirming our earlier conclusions that the most frequent pure revenue arbitrage opportunities are for small price differences in the course of normal trading across exchanges. Nonetheless, many blocks do contain substantial pure revenue fees. 36,860 observed blocks contain pure revenue fees that exceed 20% of total stealable fees. 12,000 blocks derive the majority of stealable fees from pure revenue, and 2,500 blocks derive more than 80% of stealable fees from pure revenue. Occasionally, these fees can be substantial and provide substantial miner incentives to orphan blocks or otherwise deviate from the mining protocol. Figure 16 shows the 20 blocks observed on Ethereum with the highest absolute pure revenue order optimization fees. As an example, the highest block contained an arbitrage trade generating a revenue of 101.6 ETH, dwarfing the block reward of 3 ETH, and the insignificant explicit transaction fees of 0.022 ETH. In this particular block, one transaction generated all the pure revenue order optimization fees. And this is just an example of the magnitude, because what miner operating on self-interest wouldn't want to reorganize the blockchain to generate those fees for themselves? 101 ETH versus the regular 3 ETH block reward. That's the incentive that is there. And of course, it's this outlier case that we're concerned about. Even though most of the blocks don't have this, it's the one outlier that causes an attack. Section B, undercutting attacks. Undercutting attacks represent one vector of attack that can leverage order optimization fees. It's well known that fixed per block miner rewards are a key feature of secure and stable cryptocurrency protocols, as originally described. In that work, the authors analyze the incentives of blockchain miners in a regime where transaction fees exceed the inflationary subsidy paid to miners by a blockchain protocol. They observe that when the block reward is denominated by fees, rewards have high variance. As a result, a miner can fork a high fee block, holding back some fees to attract other miners to build on the fork. In extreme cases, incentives to deviate from the protocol may lead to disruption in miner strategies for economically rational miners, reducing the security provided by block confirmations. Prior to our work, transaction fees have been viewed as the only source of value for undercutting attacks, with said prior work even calling a world in which fees dominate block rewards a, quote, transaction fee regime, end quote. That regime seemed a distant prospect. The title of prior work, which is, quote, on the instability of Bitcoin without the block rewards, refers to Bitcoin block rewards going to zero, an event anticipated around the year 2140. Our study shows that order optimization fees are a form of value that sometimes dominates explicit transaction fees today. The tail of the distribution in Figure 15 and all of the example blocks in Figure 16 represent such opportunities. And those are the figures describe the examples that we just gave. There are just more of them. In other words, undercutting attacks represent a present threat in Ethereum, and one that will grow with the success of smart contracts that attract order optimization fees. Other potential sources of order optimization fees are mentioned in Jeremy Clark's On Decentralizing Prediction Markets and Order books. Most importantly, our view of arbitrage remains conservative, and we emphasize that pure revenue opportunities represent a small slice of total ordering fees. There are many possible sources of ordering fees payable to miners, including more sophisticated arbitrage. There are also many other forms of miner extractable value. Miners can steal arbitrage opportunities from arbitrageurs by taking them themselves. Additionally, the survey in other works describes several other sources of MEV, including the ability to buy into profitable ICOs early and the manipulation of games of chance. Undercutting attacks can leverage order optimization fees or any other MEV from newly generated blocks. The second attack we describe can use MEVs from past blocks to subsidize an attack. And before we dive into time-banded attacks, just to kind of recap this, the risk to a smart contract blockchain like Ethereum is that, take for example that outsized block where the miner would have gotten 101 ETH and they want to reorder the blockchain so that they get to validate the block that gets them that reward. And so they can use that 101 ETH to pay off other miners. Remember that the average reward of ETH for validating a block that we were talking about, the comparable was 3 ETH, and transaction fees were 0.02 ETH. So they only have to bribe a rationally acting miner 3.2, anything more than 3.2 ETH, in theory, would be successful in bribing other validators or other miners to mine their fork, their chain. And if you do that, you could get enough miners to hop and reorganize the blocks in the chain. And you could do this post-fact and basically double spend. That is the risk here. It's not only double spend, there are other things, but that's the risk that miner extractable value has to the consensus layer. Essentially, you would have blocks propagate, and then the miners would collude to do a reorganization of the blockchain and basically fork and go off. And because the miner is paying off other miners with that ETH, that outsized block reward, they go along with it. And that becomes the longest valid chain. Section C, time bandit attacks. We now describe time bandit attacks, a new second attack vector that can exploit miner extractable value. They can exploit MEV from new blocks, but more powerfully can also use MEV from past blocks via rewinding. Time bandit attacks are conceptually simple. Suppose a blockchain has a suffix, as in a subchain, of a specific height, with the current block height of height 1, in which stealable value exceeds block rewards. So you can gain more ETH by attacking than by gaining block rewards as an honest miner. An adversary can rewind to height 0 and use the resulting MEV to subsidize a profitable 51% attack that mines a fork up to or past height 1. Of course, a time bandit attack relies on real-time access to massive mining resources, as noted in other works. However, rental attacks are feasible using cloud resources, particularly for systems such as Ethereum that rely heavily on GPUs, which are standard cloud commodities. We illustrate with an example that relies on MEV from DEX rewinding. Here's the example. Consider a price spike from $1 to $3 in a token that trades on an on-chain automated market maker. A miner performing a time bandit attack can now rewrite history such that it is on the buy side of every trade, accruing a substantial balance in such a token at below market rate before the price spike. For example, if the attacker wishes to rewrite 24 hours of history and $1 million of volume occurred in exchanges with rewritable history in that token, then the attacker can obtain an MEV gross profit of 1 million times 3 minus $1 and $2 million. At the time of writing, which is March 2019, the estimate of renting that GPU power that would cost the attacker to attack the chain is around $1.78 million, which would imply a net profit of $220,000. And I think this example really brings the time bandit attack home because there are outside arbitrage world cases that can be traded. And if you can rewrite history on the blockchain and get all of those blocks propagated to become the longest chain, then there is a lot of value to be made. We stress that time bandit attacks are not limited to MEV from DEXes. A variety of smart contract systems allow anyone to participate and earn profit for doing so, often a desirable design goal for the style of permissionless and open interaction that lends itself naturally to blockchains. Any on-chain action in the past that could have potentially profited a miner today, including actions that unconditionally earned them ETH in the past, are thus potential sources for time bandit attacks. Because smart contracts are Turing-complete scripts and carry complex interactions, estimating the size of these opportunities is a challenging problem we defer to future work. Time bandit attacks in Ethereum. Recent transaction statistics suggest that Ethereum is vulnerable to time bandit attacks. For example, decentralized exchange volumes show a peak of $1.5 billion of traded assets on Ethereum's decentralized exchanges in July of 2018. While it's hard to gauge the total stealable value in this volume, the current estimated 1-month cost of a 51% attack on Ethereum is approximately $56 million, more than 25 times lower than this DEX volume. We posit that order optimization fees alone that we have described threaten the security of today's Ethereum network. As figures 15 and 16 above show, blocks with high order optimization fees and/or arbitrage opportunities can already enable such attacks. More general and alarmingly time bandit attacks can be subsidized by a malicious miner's ability to rewrite profitable trades retroactively, stealing profits from arbitrageurs and users while still claiming gas fees on failed transactions and attempt execution. The resulting MEV is potentially massive, suggesting a possible serious threat in Ethereum today. Of course, a full analysis of the threat would require an understanding of how time-bandit attackers might compete against one another to harvest MEV, by analogy with PGAs. This is a topic for future research. Section 8. Open questions and future work. Our results raise many important questions, some about the arbitrage community itself. For example, it would benefit arbitrageurs to collude with miners, but we observe no such collusion. Preliminary experiments show that bot transactions are equally distributed across mining pools. Are there incentives to avoid collusion, such as concern about the exogenous impact of miner malfeasance coming to light? Other questions arise from PGA modeling. Are PGAs positive or negative sum games? In what ways could our proposed model be helpfully enriched? More broadly, it is important to observe that DEXes are just the tip of the iceberg. At the time of writing, IDEX, the largest, is ranked 119 by volume by CoinMarketCap. It has about $1 million in 24-hour volume, compared with $970 million on Binance, the leading centralized exchange. DEX volume is roughly 0.01% that on centralized exchanges. Just as an aside, that has dramatically changed since writing. Malfeasance in centralized exchanges might well be rampant, possibly even more egregiously so than in DEXes. As activity in such exchanges take place off-chain, it's private and cannot easily be ascertained without privileged access. Additionally, while centralized exchange malfeasance might seem not to impact on-chain security, the two are inextricably linked. By altering token trading dynamics on-chain, an adversary could manipulate and profit from centralized exchange dynamics. For example, a time-bandit attack could accumulate cheap tokens for offloading in a centralized exchange. These observations raise several key follow-up questions. What forms do arbitrage take in centralized exchanges, and at what volumes? What about front-running? Barring direct access, what techniques can be used to accurately measure various forms of trading activity in centralized exchanges? What financial incentives do centralized exchanges create for malfeasances in DEXes? How might they impact blockchain stability? What other insights might our data yield on DEX arbitrage, especially in quantifying opportunities that are not pure revenue? How much larger is the full arbitrage economy than executed? Can tight bounds be developed for the amount of MEV on Ethereum today? Section 9. Conclusion. We have reported a sizable economy of bots profiting from opportunities provided by transaction ordering in DEXes. We quantify the breadth of a specific subset of arbitrage, pure revenue opportunities, providing lower bounds on the profitability of ordering manipulation. We have also formally modeled the behavior of bots competing against each other for miner supply transaction priority in priority gas auctions. Our empirical study validates several key predictions of our model, including the convergence of bots on a form of profitable cooperation involving minimal gas price increases. We also show that in many concrete cases, bots' revenue from pure revenue arbitrage alone far exceeds the Ethereum block rewards and transaction fees. Finally, we argue that miner extractable value, particularly in the form of order optimization fees, implicit fees from modifying transaction order, threatens blockchain consensus stability. Such fees are large enough to subsidize serious attacks on the network. They constitute an economic vulnerability that should be a current cause for concern in Ethereum. So that is a wrap on Flashboys 2.0. I highly recommend you pick it up and give it a look, give it a read through. There'll be a link in the lesson resources because there are also a lot of links to and references to prior work in this space. They reference a lot of early work on Bitcoin and research on the transaction fee structure in Bitcoin, which is kind of the OG in the space in terms of risks. And it's just a great paper to give it a read through. I've read through it twice, and honestly, the second time it clicked much better. But I'll just summarize it here and then as always, kind of wing it on my thoughts. But basically, gas in Ethereum, it's very elegant, but there's also ways to attack the system. And not necessarily attack in a bad way, but just use gas in ways that the system design did not think of. In the sense of submitting and bidding for fees and miners accepting those transactions, even though they're not actually going to get the same amount of gas that they thought they would. And this is the technique that bots use in priority gas auctions. Because remember, the gas fee of a transaction is the gas limit times the actual amount of steps, the computation steps that you have. So if you up the gas limit that you're willing to pay, but reduce the computational steps that the transaction executes, you're actually lowering the amount of gas that a bot pays. And so we went through how priority gas auctions work, all the way to the kind of core, or I think in my opinion, the most important part of this paper, which is the consensus layer attacks, and how applications that are built on Ethereum, like Uniswap, actually make attacks on the consensus possible. And at the end of the day, if attacks, consensus layer attacks, happen on a blockchain on a regular basis, that blockchain loses trust. And that's the real risk here. And in this part of the read-through, we covered 2 time-banded attacks and optimization organization fees attacks, where essentially a miner could bribe other miners to collude with them, and in time-banded attacks is actually go back in time and rewrite the blockchain, because you see that there's this huge trade that you could make. Imagine going back in time to be part of the Big Short, right? Who wouldn't do that? And those risks are real to the consensus layer. There's a lot of follow-up work. That this isn't new. This was out in 2019. So there is a lot of research on this. MEV isn't actually, it's not solved. There's lots of research on how to deal with it. There are proposals that it's actually useful because it adds volume. And at the end of the day, bots become part of an economic market-driven force. And so the price comes down and the competition is fierce, especially because it's technical competition. I think for me, the main concern is there's a lot of discussion in the proof of work, proof of stake world, kind of arguments discussion, I think labels it kindly, but about the centralization vectors between proof of work and proof of stake. And what the Ethereum community, the pro proof of stake community, will say is that proof of stake democratizes access to block rewards, and therefore democratizes access to the blockchain, because anyone can stake, and therefore anyone can reap the rewards of staking benefits, and that way the blockchain stays decentralized. I can stake, you can stake, we don't have to have a mining rig, and we don't have to have cheap electric power, and we don't have to be so technically savvy to do it and join a mining pool. Whereas the proof of work proponents will say proof of stake means the rich get richer. If you're staking $100 million of ETH and I'm staking $5 million of ETH, and the assumption is we're both restaking and compounding our staking rewards. The assumption for proof of work folks is that your 100 million will compound at a higher rate, because that's how compounding works. If we both get a 10% yield, then you're getting 10 million a year, I'm only getting 100,000 a year. After a few years, you have a much, much larger stake than I do. And that's a valid concern. For me, MEV magnifies this concern. It multiplies it, because as you might have discerned, a lot of the opportunities to extract extra value from the blockchain is at the validator miner level. It's at the person who is structuring the block, what order they put the transaction fees. And so there are 2 ways that they can extract more value. They could also be bribed by those priority gas auctions, in which case they're just increasing transaction fees. And if that becomes too high, then honestly validators get a much higher reward, right? They're no longer getting that 10% of mining rewards that's just based on the amount of stake they have, right? Because at the end of the day, the staking rewards are based on how many blocks you validate. How many blocks you validate is a derivative of how much stake you have in the network. The more stake, the more blocks you validate. The more blocks you validate, the more block rewards you get. But in a system like this, there's a statistical increase in the block rewards you have, because if, let's say, 25% of blocks have a ridiculously high block reward, then you as the miner with a larger stake now have a much higher percentage of getting those abnormally high blocks. So that's kind of one risk, in which case we wouldn't get the same rewards. The second, much greater risk is that sophisticated miners become these flashbots, becomes these MEV extractors. I am not a sophisticated miner. Even if I set up a fully running node at home and I validate and I don't stake through Lido or Rocket Pool, which are kind of the ways for the common folks to stake their ETH and become validators through other protocols, that's not the sophisticated way of doing it. A miner with the resources to do it, a technically savvy miner, just has much more room for upside by integrating validating blocks with flashbots like these. Because at the end of the day, they could be paid off by arbitrage bots, but they can also be reordering the blocks, the transactions themselves, and extracting that value. And that's where the centralization risk, to my mind, occurs and accrues. Because if you have a technically savvy team that's mining, then they can really create barriers to entry, or at least barriers to capital, by accruing enough recurring rewards over and over and over and over again. And that's a concern that I have in terms of the decentralization of the proof of stake mechanism, basically. And naturally, the more they accrue, the more there's risk of them doing time-banded attacks and paying off other miners to do optimization attacks. And that's a risk to the network at a larger scale. So with that, we are going to wrap up Flashboys 2.0. I hope you enjoyed this. For me, honestly, this was a tough read. This morning has been difficult, but we'll put that aside. I hope you're coming away with the key tenets of what high-frequency trading is in a blockchain world of smart contracts like Ethereum. Also, what this means for Bitcoin. If Bitcoin tries to add a layer 2 that's more sophisticated than Lightning, where people actually have incentives to do reorganization attacks. I think this is something the Bitcoin community isn't aware of enough, and it's definitely out there and lurking. And based on this, we will be moving forward into some of the more relevant or kind of recent research papers on attacks and attack vectors, risks to Ethereum of proof of stake. This paper is written very much in a proof of work Ethereum kind of world, but there have been also recent papers on risks to Ethereum's proof of stake. And that's what we're going to be diving into, because I don't know if you've listened to the blockchain bite that released on Friday. The merge is coming. If you pay attention to what's going on in the Ethereum R&D Discord, the merge is definitely coming. It's exciting to see, and we have to be educated for it. So hope you enjoy this. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Ethereum Audible or at YahooCL. Always love to hear from you, and bye.